Hello, everyone, and welcome to Historical Accuracy Within Strategy Games, a panel that we're running as part of TactiCon 2024. My name's Nick. I work at Firefly Studios on the Stronghold series. Our most recent project is Stronghold Definitive Edition, and we're currently working on a new Stronghold game in Unreal Engine 5. My job title is Chief Marketing Officer, but these days I also help run the company. I've been with Firefly for about 12 years now, and I help run the company under the watchful gaze of our friends at Devolver Digital. That's kind of who I am and what I do and what my relevance is here, mainly Stronghold related. So should we go around and introduce ourselves, starting with Didi?
Oh, hello, nice to meet you guys. My name is Didi. I'm a solo developer from Austria, doing strategy games, historical strategy games. My first release was about 2 years ago, called Roma Invicta. It's a game where you play as the Romans and conquering ancient France. It's a turn-based strategy game, a turn-based strategy map with real-time battles like Total War series, but with pixel graphics. And at the moment, I'm finishing a strategy and action game about the air combat in World War One. It's called Skies Above the Great War. It's currently in early access. Uh, yeah, I think for now for the introduction.
Great, James, you want to go next?
Hello, and nice to meet you all.
Mhm.
I'm James Brooksby. I'm the CEO and founder of Absolutely Games here over in the UK. Our recent release is Classified France 44, which is a turn-based tactics game set in World War II, telling the story of the French resistance and the run-up to D-Day. Yeah, we've been at this we sort of started in 2019, so it's about 4 years of sort of building a company and building new tools and technology to build out Classified. Built a fantastic team, and we're doing more things in the space. We can't quite talk about them yet, but we're very pleased with the game we've made and the team we've made. And it was a very, very interesting journey in how we came to make Classified, and also how we built what we built along the way, and changed our minds along the way as well. So I'm looking forward to talking about that.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a challenge within this talk to not reveal stuff that we're not all working on that hasn't been announced yet. Jeremy, do you want to go next or
That's not
last?
my problem at all. So hi, I'm Jeremy Spillman. I'm one of the founders of Blind Fluke Studios. I'm the creative director and lead game designer in the studio. And we are currently working on a game that is not released yet. It's called Ground of Aces. It's all about taking care of remote airplane bases during World War II. And we are currently in an alpha version of this game. And we're working towards an early access release for early mid next year. So yeah, I can really openly talk about what we're currently doing.
Right, and hopefully if the rest of us talk about stuff that we're not supposed to be talking about, they can just edit it out somehow. I guess before we dive into individual questions, should we just start with the kind of like overall jumping off point, which is, anyone that wants to chip in first, what place does historical research and accuracy, that term accuracy within video games is quite nebulous, but what place does that take during the game development process? Is it a pre-production thing? Is it all throughout the whole creation of the game? Is it mainly during production? Like, where does it sit for you guys? Anyone wants to go first, they can.
I'll say something first if you like. Yeah, I think it's very interesting because I think it is all the way through, right? I think it's all the way through. Obviously, at the very beginning, there's a moment in time of, well, where are we going to set this game idea? What have we got in mind in general? Because for us, the initial premise was, well, let's do a World War II turn-based tactics game because that's what we feel would be cool, and it doesn't seem to be something that's being covered that much, really, surprisingly to us. But where to set it, and what would be interesting, and what would players have as something that they haven't really seen before? So for us, there was sort of thinking about that, and importantly, thinking about the mixture of the genre with the historical setting. So once we'd sort of honed in on World War II, well, when you think about, for example, turn-based tactics, squad level turn-based tactics, you're pretty much dealing with espionage and small squad mechanics and sort of stealthing around and so forth. So it lends itself to commandos, that sort of size of scale of things. But sort of commandos and things like that had been covered, so therefore it was looking at something different. And really, one of the things that we found, which was fascinating just through reading lots of material, was that the story of the French resistance and the people that work with the French resistance, which were, parachuted by the Allies to work alongside the French resistance, that story really hadn't been told. A lot of what people think of when they hear about D-Day is the D-Day landings, but what led up to that? And what we found out was there's an enormous amount of heroic action that took place and a lot of sacrifice that took place beforehand. So that's what we wanted to tell. But then how should we tell it, and should we do it justice? But ultimately, we're still a computer game, right? We're still a game. It still needs to be fun. It still needs to provide escapism for those people who are playing it, and also not confuse or overly simulate. And those are sort of things we can get into. But like that swingometer, and I did this a lot, during many a conversation of like, is it a game? Is it a simulation? Where are we? And that needle moved constantly. And I, for like several years was sort of waving my hand around from my home office, discussing where we should sit, almost to the end.
Lots of this on calls.
Yeah, lots of this. I'm literally doing that on calls, like gesturing, going, "Well, there, are we there?"
I'm glad it's not just me. What I think it changes the kind of research we do at different stages. I think like when we're trying to do concept art and trying to create some of the earliest assets, like for us, like going to castles is great. Getting reference photography, that kind of stuff's really good. Especially like you mentioned commandos, and with the definitive edition of Stronghold, we're still doing 2D isometric pre-rendered style games. So reference photography is really helpful for that, because obviously we're just kind of presenting something from one angle. So if we can find a great castle like Rochester or somewhere like that in the UK, it's just really helpful for us in that early process to get that photography really early on, and just go to these places. And luckily we set our games in the UK, so we can kind of go and just research it firsthand, which is and not have to travel very far to do so, which is really, really helpful. And then later, like you said, it's just kind of reading and reading and reading and reading. I think when the co-founders were founding Firefly 20 years ago, they were using books a lot. I think these days it's just the internet is just such an amazing resource, for sort of quantitative stuff. So like when we're trying to come up with ideas for units, factions, that kind of thing, that it's always really helpful to go online and just research that stuff. But then I still think there's a place for, like, I studied history at uni and I learned at the British Library, and whenever there's like a really qualitative topic that I want to go into and deep dive, I'll just go there and just sit there in the pin drop silence of that building and just really get stuck into a particular topic. But yeah, it definitely varies depending on where we're at in the production process.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely echo that, in the sense that there's not just one place where, historical research is being used, but it's through the whole process. I guess James would agree that the good thing about World War II is that since photography has been a thing and so much has been very meticulously archived and detailed, we were able to get a lot out of actually first-hand material from the time out of photography. Because in our game, for example, it's very important to us that you can recognize where your base is. So a base in Litchfield or Krefeld or Casablanca should feel different and should reflect on how people spent their time on this airbase. So the first thing we immediately did is went through the photo archives, for example, from the RAF, where we could see like, okay, what were people taking photos of in their downtime? How did they build up the fields in an early stage? What did the crews do there? What were they proud of? Is another thing that I think is really strong when it comes to photography, because people really wanted to take a picture of something they were especially proud of, even if it's like a small detail prop or something. And that makes it way easier once you go into the 20th century, in my opinion.
Yeah, of course. With Roma and Victor, I just have to use, let's say, movies, even documentaries, but it's quite a guess how it really looked, how it really felt. But during development, I think it's called The Barbarians, the series that came out from Netflix. I watched it while I was developing, and I saw things there, and I just put them into it. I thought, okay, hopefully they did their research, and I just use this as a solo developer. I don't have really the budget for research to get historians into the project, so I have to use what I get. And yeah, the good thing is it's so long gone, so I don't think people won't blame me if I don't get everything right. So I think it's easier the farther you go in history.
I always feel a little bit self-conscious in conversations with other historical games developers, because I'm like, am I deep enough in this? Like, are they going to look down on me for watching Outlaw King and going, that's a great example of how cool a trebuchet should look, just because it's been in a sort of like Netflix or Hollywood movie. But that's the great thing about the internet and the sort of democratization of resources, right? It kind of allows us all to get access to it. And just as a hot tip, if you are in London and do want to go to the British Library and use their resources, just pretend you're like an academic. It's not very hard to do, and they'll give you a pass, and then you can just go in and do it. And it's a great place.
One thing that helped us on, once we'd got the sort of company up and running, was that I added to our team an old friend of mine who worked with us in the early days of sort of when I joined the games industry in the 90s. And he is a subject matter expert in lots of ways. I mean, he's got an incredible memory and reads and creates, writes books and creates tabletop, hardcore war games of World War II and other wars. So his knowledge and his input was fantastic, and he can talk like the best of them about lots of history, including World War II history, and that helped a great deal because he's very well read on it, and he's also very good at reading very quickly and so forth. So I was able to get up to speed on the things we needed. But of course, that does create a tension, because at the same time you've got an expert in the field of World War II and thinking about that audience. And I think that's very important, is like thinking about the audience of people that would come to our game and go, right, I want to be there. I want it to be historically accurate. I want it to be exactly as it should be. But again, we also know that there's a bunch of people who will be coming just because they want the gameplay that they've played before for this genre. And again, that created the tension. We had many a heated debate about these things, over the time, because it is a choice, right? It's a choice for us, and there isn't necessarily the right. I mean, maybe there is the right choice, but it's hard to know what is the right choice. I mean, it's interesting you were talking about the airfields there and so forth, because one of the things for us was, where should we try and recreate real conflicts that took place in real places? But actually, a lot of it's unknown because it was anonymous, and some of the things that are well known are not. They don't necessarily play well as a game set with the restrictions of our game and the distances that make sense for the game. which is interesting because actually they were over quite large distances. And again, in our genre, people want to see the characters up relatively close, so you need to be quite close so the distances come down. And actually, distance was one of the things we talked about a lot during the game development. So it was an interesting conversation about what's a game distance versus a simulation distance, that kind of stuff.
I mean, I can totally pick that up right away because I mean that's what I wrote down to, the kind of the question of, how do you balance accuracy to compelling and engaging gameplay experience. And we also have the problem of distances. So, for example, I mean, you can imagine we really want to be very accurate with technology because a lot of our fans are also fans of airplanes. We are as well. We're going into a comic style where even also our the artists that we are trying to emulate were big fans of the technology of World War II planes. But it is very well known, if you research that kind of a Spitfire Mach 1 needs around 200 meters to take off. If you factor in that it needs to go about 30 meters into the air to clear like trees and stuff, that's 300. Our base map is 500 by 500 voxels big. So even for like a basic fighter jet, our people would need to build half a map of a runway. If we factor in a bomber like a Lancaster, it would go to 1.5 kilometers. So it's like 3 times the size of our map.
It goes off the side of the map.
Yes. So, and the thing is, we were debating this heavily. Like, what do we do now? Do we need to have bigger zoom ratios? Do we need to show that whole length? But that would mean that we have the characters really, really tiny and you can't really recognize them. We would have the problem of logistics over like a huge distance. We would have performance issues because we just cannot place every single wall and then show this big of a field, and so on, so on. Funnily enough, I mean, we have an alpha of about 1,000 players. They're all huge fans of the genre. We had now the first alpha release, we're now at the second. We made a Spitfire that takes off in 50 meters. Nobody cared.
No.
We never had a feedback from any fan that they were like, this is way too short of a runway distance for a Spitfire to take off. So sometimes I feel like maybe we're also overthinking these types of things.
Oh, we absolutely are. Yeah. 100%. I think when people look at video games as well, they kind of, it's a bit like if you see, footage of someone being interviewed outdoors, right? You know that the sound quality is not going to be great, so you kind of adjust for that. And I think people do the same thing when they're looking at video games. And, as long as it's not too different to what they expect, and as long as the scale is not too, abstracted, I think, simulation fans are generally quite pleased with what they're given. But yeah, I mean, it's difficult for us. Castle sieges were really long, boring things where people just tended to like starve each other out or sit behind the walls and wait for someone to get bored and wander off. So yeah, I mean, I think in the original couple of games we basically had like a year counter at the bottom of the screen, which is like, just so you know, you may have destroyed this castle in 3 minutes in game time, but in reality it's now 1075. So the little things like that help. And I think just kind of those little nods towards it go a long way to, making people feel like, oh, okay, they've thought about that and accounted for it. Because we are all very lucky to, like you were saying, you've kind of attracted this very interested, quite hardcore, passionate audience. And I think within the strategy and simulation space, we're really, really super lucky to have those people in the game and, interested in what we're doing, because it means that we can kind of cater to their needs really well and kind of bring that passion out. But it definitely, just those little nods go a long way, I think, towards making people feel like we've done our research and, we've accounted for the fact that, because I'm not going to make you sit through a 30-year siege or a 3-year siege or whatever. But yeah, it's good to kind of bring that fun in there.
Interestingly, on that siege, I can imagine, because I remember stories of people playing the older submarine SSIs and things like that, and the U-boat simulators. They would try and simulate it in real time, and like some of the flight sim people do as well. So I can imagine if you gave them the option, somebody would do it. Somebody would, probably Twitch stream like, okay, I'm gonna do this siege for real. Let's see who breaks first, the game or me.
Good idea, actually. Maybe I'll write that down for a future option.
Future option.
Yeah, we did have a content creator who I think he played through the last mission in the second Stronghold game without using the like certain resources, and it took him like 16 hours. So that guy would probably play through a 2-year siege, even if he's leaving his PC on and just kind of checking on it every now and then. It's a good idea. Thank you for that. That's great.
Yeah, somebody will do it. Somebody will do it. Now, it's interesting when you were talking about like that, realism of distances and things like that. What I think, can't prove it, but one of the things is getting things sort of correct relative to each other. And that's sort of interesting one where it comes to weapons, right? So even though our distances were shrunk and things are sort of lose accuracy at much, much, much shorter ranges than they would, everything else is sort of set relative to those, to each other. And obviously loads and loads of games do this, right? Shotguns are actually accurate for quite a long range. But in games, everybody in their mind, especially not just like it relative to each other, just gamers, and now are set to think that shotguns are like really, really short range, and it's totally inaccurate beyond a certain range and all these kind of things. But
like a blunderbuss.
But yeah, exactly. People think of them more as like a sawn-off blunderbuss, like it's a ridiculously bad gun. So it's sort of been interesting to think about that in terms of setting things relative to each other, and therefore our players, when they go to the shop and they get a different weapon and it's got different stats, it's been set, by League nicely relative to another weapon, so people can go, okay, yeah, that kind of makes sense that weapon would have been a bit like this, but not very good at that, and so on. Even though, if you were to look at the real gun, it would be firing, hundreds and hundreds of meters with great accuracy. But that's no fun for a game, because nearly every one of our weapons would be really accurate at the ranges that we're fighting. It's almost like those comedy sketches in sort of comedy cowboy movies where they're actually, sat behind boxes a few meters away, just going, pew pew, pew pew, like that, and of course they'll be really accurate, but that's no fun.
It's true.
I think it's not only the distance. Sorry.
No, go on.
It's all the matter of scale, I guess people want those huge battles. When I think of Roman Victor or those ancient and medieval battles, people want those huge battles from movies and stuff. But as you already mentioned, the engine can't handle it. And also the player, I guess, with controls, those huge armies. There are games that get this quite good, like the Total War series, but it's quite limiting, of course, and it won't make that much fun, I guess, if you make this historically accurate, like you said, with the distances, also the scale of battles. And
yeah, I think it's quite interesting. I think we were looking at, for a wholly different conversation with somebody, about simulating, the Battle of Waterloo, but also in the same game simulating much smaller skirmishes. And you go, well, how small is the small skirmish? That and they go, well, actually, that's just a couple of ranks of soldiers. And you go, well, how big's Battle of Waterloo? Oh, that's tens of thousands across kilometers of soldiers. It's like, so how are you going to control all those people, and how fast do they? And therefore, you have to make a different game, right? For that, it doesn't scale well. And I think that's the kind of things that we have to think about when we're trying to make a game that's set in one particular place. Is like the gamer would love to potentially have, like you say, a real battle, but actually, does it scale well, particularly to have those battles, and are they fun to control and play if it was across kilometers or tens of kilometers?
exactly.
And how on earth does your game engine handle like zooming right into one man and then pulling right out to several kilometers?
But I think these limitations can also be like very interesting for the design process, right? So one of the challenges we are currently, for example, also facing is that there's like a ton of documented paint jobs for planes, because depending on the faction, depending on the model, depending on the time frame, depending on the use case, there is just so many, skins, let's say, that a plane should look like. And people will notice that, a plane is not accurately reflecting the time frame it is being used to. So one thing we found out during researching it is that we actually found the real documents that were sent to the air bases as instructions to paint the planes, which were surprisingly vague. Like, the new color is now dark gray instead of light gray, and the underbelly needs to be covered completely different than the order was 2 weeks ago. And now we're actually kind of considering maybe that could be an interesting gameplay mechanic. We are not giving people the skins, but we let people paint the planes, and then the HQ, based on these parameters, will actually judge the people who are playing the game whether they accurately reflect now dark gray or not, without them really knowing for real what dark gray entails.
You've made me think about an interesting thing there, where there's a mini game where you're trying to mix different shades of RGB to try and get the exact that you think is the sort of like duck egg grey that they want.
And then you get back from the HQ like, no, that is wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can't base graded on that performance.
I love the idea that the instruction was sent by someone who was just like, yeah, whatever, just a slightly dark shade of blue, and then it gets done and sent back to someone who's like, no, this is not what I said. Their subordinate just couldn't be bothered to really get it nailed. We've kind of gone over the next point, which is, what are the major challenges in balancing a game between historical accuracy and between engaging gameplay or narrative, or both? But are there any other factors in there that we haven't? Obviously we've talked about distance, scale, source material, that kind of stuff. But are there any major challenges that that rear their heads to bring these things up in the first place, other than just fun?
Well, I think one of the big things that, and we'll all have this, I think, in our games, is that for us, I mean, it'll be, albeit a spear or a plane or a sword or bullets, is that actually they kind of just kill sort of straight away. They're kind of more lethal than we simulate in games, because we have health bars, right, and so forth, and that kind of thing. So the thing that we looked at in our genre was that we put this every shot counts in there. So we balanced morale and damage, and then made effectively shots less accurate, but made them scary, because actually being shot at is incredibly scary. And that was one of the things that hadn't really been covered much in this genre before, was like, if you miss somebody, and in fact, to be fair, in nearly every or in many genres and FPSs and so forth, you shoot at somebody and they still come running at you and run around the corner and shoot. But actually, if somebody shot at you in your vague general direction with a medium machine gun, you just hide and be really scared. So actually, we sort of simulated the scariness of the different weapons. So like, some weapons are less scary because they're quite quiet and suppressed, and you might not even have heard it coming at you, and so on. But like, some weapons are more scary, and some people are more likely to be scared, and some people are less likely to be scared on their training. So effectively, even if you missed somebody, you got a level of fear, and it's sort of like fear and morale and so on. And that was an interesting one, because what Lee said in our early conversations is, the thing is, once you've been shot, you're kind of like either dead or out of action. It's pretty, a lot of movies show people like carrying on with full of holes, but generally it's not how it works. So we sort of like said, well, being hit is pretty lethal. Now, interestingly, in our first sort of tests, we actually had lethality very, very high. So if you did successfully hit, that was it. It wasn't as much fun. And again, that's a thing that, albeit for many games that we make in all different eras and settings, is actually lethality is generally quite high. I mean, that's kind of the point, isn't it? You know, swords and spears and planes and bombs, and you know, so how do you make that? How do you balance that and balance it for fun? And obviously, in many an FPS, they just have health bars, and people are pretty spongy. We had to have that sort of similar balance of lethality and fear and duration and all those kinds of stuff. But I imagine that similar if you're trying to simulate an aircraft, it's like, well, is it, it might get taken down really quickly, but is that fun? Things like that.
I mean, I'll gladly pick that up because I feel like that is something that probably all four of us have something to say about, like lethality and pure statistics of war. Because I mean, I guess all of us need to figure out how can we still make the experience of a war kind of rewarding and fun, without romanticizing it. If we would just look at pure statistics of how many people from bomber crews would come back, and we're crafting a game where we want people to really get to know and care about every person on the airfield, our game now runs the risk of being like highly demoralizing, because it will turn into the same type of meat grinder that World War II actually was in that regard. But we need to ask ourselves, is that what we want people to walk away with at the end of a play session? Do we want, like every few months have them lose 25% of the people they cared for, that they built up, that they really got to know their quirks? And I think that is really hard to balance there, that whole question of how accurate to like a war that really exists do we want to be. But on the other hand, also give people a fulfilling play experience where you're not just playing this game for 60 hours and you're like, I can't take this anymore. This is so sad.
That's an interesting one, that one, because we ended up making a choice of having a slightly more movie-like cast of characters that wouldn't die and tell their stories, over what people sort of expected for something that sort of has its roots in the XCOM series, in that, like, well, surely you'll just have a roster of characters and they'll just like keep dying, and you'll just phone up and get some more and they'll die, and but actually it was a hard choice. But actually we went down the route of having things because we wanted to tell an important story, and it's hard to tell a story with a character of disposable units. So yeah, that was a hard choice for us to go down that route, because so many of the players expect sort of disposable characters, but actually we felt that we wanted to honor the stories, so therefore we didn't want to dispose, and we didn't want it to be too miserable, right? Because it's not science fiction where it's like, well, I don't know, it's just some space marine in the future. This is real people, these are real stories. So like you say, do you want to depress with real history? So I think it's a very interesting point what you say about like bomber crews and air crews. Do you want to go, I suppose, the slightly more Hollywood depiction, or do you want to go on the documentary depiction of what we're saying, what we've got here in our games, what we're saying?
Yeah, I think like in terms of lethality, I think that's definitely something that we're all constantly wrestling with, and anyone who's working in strategy, history, simulation, even colony sim, those kind of genres, is always going to sort of struggle with. And the more you go into simulation, the more difficult it is. Like we've got, our system is, you have a peasant who comes to your castle, you can click on that peasant, they'll say a funny line in a West Country accent, they'll have a name, you'll then build armor, feed that person, house that person, they'll go join your army, and if they die very quickly, then not only is that not a great experience for someone who just wants to play the game, but also they've put all that effort into creating the castle economy, building the structure around them, and recruiting them into the army in the first place. So that's something that we've always kind of, we've had games where there's healing involved, where there isn't healing, because that's more historically accurate, where we've thought about limiting it to like an apothecary who can only do certain things, but it's always a fine balance. And the way we've tried to get out of the the challenge of making historical games that aren't too depressing, especially with the medieval times, because it was just like, it's funny now looking back at it, but at the time it would have been horrible. And I think the way we get around that is just by finding the really stupid, funny things that did happen in medieval times. Like we did a RTS based in East Asia, and we had things like oxen, where you could light their tails and they would run off towards the enemy, which happened during a siege in China. So it's like one instance of that historically, but it's funny, so let's put it in the game. We had a whole gong farming system in Stronghold 2, which, if you don't know, gong is shit. What someone said, oh, did you know that urine was used in the production of gunpowder? So in this East Asian game, we had gunpowder. So the guy who made gunpowder, at one point in his animation for creating that, would turn towards the barrel and just piss in the thing that he was making the gunpowder in. So we kind of tried to, and like other Monty Python-esque stuff, like throwing cows from trebuchets and stuff like that. We kind of just try to sort of pepper that funny stuff in that has like either a tiny bit of historical accuracy or just it's in something that like a piece of popular culture like Monty Python, just to keep it light while still kind of having the torture devices and all that kind of stuff that is fun to see in a simulation, in a medieval simulation game, but not necessarily be the focus all the time.
Yeah, I tried really to simulate my airplanes and the damage model, and quickly found out that I had a problem with one-shot kills because, as you already said, it's pretty demoralizing for the player if they have an ace pilot and he gets one-shotted. So really had then to balance this out, that this does not happen, and that your aces will be more likely to survive. So absolutely agree what you say. It's always the balance between lethality and gameplay fun.
And also, like we've all sort of suggested, ultimately we are trying to entertain and give people some level of escapism. Like the talking about the Romans and so forth. I mean, they were very, very brutal and a lot of their invasions and did horrendous things by anybody's standards. But like players sort of don't want to think about that too hard when they're, doing.
Actually, I did implement that in my game.
Did you? How far did you go? I'm curious.
Not so far, but you can plunder villages and burn them down, but it's not really depicted. So
yes, I think the depiction would be the problem. But yeah, I think that's the thing, is people want to think about this a bit, but also they have bought this for entertainment and escapism. Like this, I mean, that's what games are, right? So again, we've got to get that fine line between almost what mood they've got into the product for, like the game for. Are they expecting? I'm trying to think of are they expecting that sort of more heroic Hollywood experience, or are they looking for Schindler's List or something when they're going in, right? And we've got to get that mood right in the creative direction of what we're making, so that they and get that expectation right when they actually buy the game, in what they get. So because you don't want to get that wrong, because it might put somebody right off that the game they were looking forward to playing.
I think it's. I mean, there's a lot of baggage that comes with all of that. We, for example, will be in a very specific conundrum really soon, or like it will be really interesting to see as a studio kind of how it plays out. Because we very early made the decision that we want to have multiple sites and basically all sites playable as a base building game. So in our crowdfunding campaign, we also had as a stretch goal that you can play as the Luftwaffe eventually. Now, on the other hand, we're building a game where you very deeply connect to the people on a base and you want to care for them on a very personal level. So we will at some point have a game where, let's put it as bluntly as possible, where you personally care for Nazis and want to root for them and want them to succeed, which comes with a lot of interesting, discussion points. It suddenly raises the whole topic of, painting wars in black and white. But then on the other hand, of who you attract as a fan base, what is your intention of what you want to say? So the question kind of like, how is this ethically responsible to do? To basically to humanize, to show the human side of Nazis is something that is a really, a big point of discussion and how we want to frame this as a studio. And it's going to be really, really tough to kind of maintaining that balance to make clear. So no, we are not glorifying or humanizing, the Nazi party. But on the other hand, there were people and pilots who lived on their bases and participated in the war, as any historian would kind of say.
Let's open that up then, because we're kind of moving on to the next point, which is ethical considerations. So you've already talked about it very eloquently, but what do the other panelists think in terms of, what ethical considerations do you take into account when dealing with, how much accuracy to include in your games versus just, fun gameplay and a functioning narrative and just a good game? Because it's hard enough making a game which is like art plus tech, and then you're having to go art plus tech plus all these other considerations. So how does that factor in for everyone else?
I think if you just focus on the strategic and the warfare aspect, there is not such such a big problem. Like, for example, if you play Hearts of Iron as Germany, they just focus on the military aspect. So there is no problem, or at least I don't have bad feelings if I play as Germany in Hearts of Iron 4. But I guess with your games, especially with France 44, I guess it's another point where you really play in France, in Nazi occupied France. So I guess there you have really to find the right balance, how you show it. And
yeah, we had to think about these things a lot. I mean, we're depicting a very, very difficult time in history, where lots of terrible atrocities happened and so forth. So we don't, as we said before, we're also making sure that people are enjoying their experience, whilst they're playing it. But we do tell historical stories. We've got these things that pop up during the game that tell some of the background history of what's going on during your play. But also we actually have these dilemma moments that pop up that say, well, you can either do this or you can do that. And they have some impact, but they also are related to history, and telling some of these stories of what happened in occupied France during that time. And as far as we made a very distinct choice that we're playing a game from a particular side. Right? We're playing the side of the Allies, and that's that. And we just said it's not even on the cards for playing as the opposing side, and it's a choice. One thing was it's going to be extra cost and time and so on and so forth, but also just morally, that was our decision. We have had not much, but some criticism come across in the community, but our community manager is very experienced in was very experienced in handling some of those people who said, why can't I play as the what's going on there, and some people said some pretty nasty stuff. So it's one of those things. But yes, we had to handle it very sensitively. You can tell I'm talking about it sensitively because it is a incredibly difficult topic. But what we felt was that at least by really telling the human stories of these people that went through trying times, and the people around them, and the people in France, and in that period of time, we could be sensitive and honor what they went through, whilst at the same time producing something which is ultimately entertainment, same as a movie, same as a TV show, things like that. It's like, how do you handle that? And I think it's over time, I think people have thought more and more about these things, as we do, as a connected community via, into the internet and social media, right? We're all thinking very hard about what other people think. Well, a lot of us are. Not everybody is, but a lot of people are, at least. Thinking about these sensitivities and thinking about how we depict what we do. So we don't just make something because it's just a bit of fun, and surely it won't do any harm. We do have to make these considerations, especially I suppose in more recent history. More recent history, and it's interesting that some people have talked to us about some other periods of even more modern history. It's like, oh, you could do a game in X or Y, and you can probably imagine what different conflicts there'd be. And actually, whereas 20, 30 years ago, you'd have gone, yeah, sure, let's make a game set in some modern conflicts. That'll be fun. And you just think of the fun. Now you'd go, yeah, no, that's not something you want to particularly pick a side, because it's very, very ambiguous. So, yeah, you have to be very, sensitive about these things. And we, did think about these things as we created our game. Interesting topic. Not an easy one though.
No, and I think that sometimes those people who leave those quite knee-jerky comments are the people that aren't thinking about it particularly deeply, perhaps. Just as saying, as someone who's, I've spent a long time at Firefly, kind of interacting with people within our community, without our community, and just kind of, addressing lots of valid concerns and valid sort of criticism and questions, but then a lot of not so valid comments as well across all the wide spectrum of social media. But it's a really interesting point about the recency of events. Even Second World War, you're dealing with events that people can still remember. In sadly in fewer and fewer numbers as the years goes on. But yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it, that 10, 15 years ago, maybe, we would have talked about certain genres, like especially FPS and other ones, just recreating, I remember one of my favorite games growing up was Command and Conquer Generals. I loved RTS as a kid, and I had absolutely no issue, despite, violence in the Middle East being a sort of just a continuous, unfortunately a continuous just fact of life as it has been for me growing up. I had absolutely no, it didn't even cross my mind back then playing it as a child that was possibly sort of controversial, or there would be ethical considerations there. And now you may have that consideration, even stuff as recent as, I don't know, a game that's depicting one of the Gulf Wars, for instance, is sort of rubs some people the wrong way for valid reasons, I think. And I think those considerations are really interesting. But it is interesting how it's shifted. We have the luxury of, I think one of our most popular series is the Strong Crusader series. And we have the luxury of that being thousands of years ago, but it's also, again, it's depicting violence in a part of the world where there is horrific stuff going on right now, and has been as long as I've been alive, to be honest, in some shape or form. And I think the way we approach that is by sticking to sort of, we still have to maintain certain things, like we want the characters to be these memorable opponents that you love to take down and love to go up against and love to make alliances with, and love to hear their voice lines and see their animations and stuff like that. But I think we've kind of just stuck to the history books, really, and done as much historical research as possible. But even with that, you get stuff like, we might refer to the Crusader armies as, invading invaders, and someone might go, well, actually, no. And it's like, no, they are, they were. So yeah, it's kind of, it's an interesting discussion point. And on the whole, most people are pretty invested and have thought about it a lot when they're raising it as a topic of conversation. And I love going to physical events because you get to meet these people in real life and have a civilized conversation, versus online where conversations can be less civilized.
Yeah, quite. I think that's the thing, is that conflicts can seem incredibly black and white, superficially, right, or further back in history and things like that. But actually, it's always far more complicated, and the prehistory and the during and the reverberations, right, are way more complicated. So yeah, and how do you even hint or cover that within a game? One of the things that's interesting in France 44, and I didn't know this, was and it was something that Lee brought in when he came on board, is like the resistance wasn't just the resistance, right? Actually, resistance was many factions in France. And we only cover 3 of them, but actually at least we do cover some factions and talk about that within the game, and actually it's part of the gameplay, is balancing off the factions to try and get them all sort of equally balanced to the moment at which D-Day happens, because that's your best outcome. But actually some people wanted a very different outcome for France, and at that point quite a lot of people thought, yep, it's going to be over relatively soon, somehow it's going to finish, so we need to be ready to take over. And the different factions who were working together also were not that united and so forth. So we sort of cover that as well, which was an education for me, right? It was an education for me, and hopefully that also helps our players get educated a little bit. And actually our characters talk about it. They talk about it back at base. It's covered in some of the, the background history and so forth. But it's like, well, there's a thing I didn't know, because it's all just talked to, again, at that sort of higher, more black and white, like there's these people and there's these people. It's like, no. Within that, it's much more complicated. And people didn't agree on things. Who knew? People didn't agree. So there you go.
I think with heroism in Hollywood, it makes that situation worse. Sorry, go on.
People complained about my game not having Hermann Göring in it. It's in the First World War. Maybe he was one of the German ace pilots, and I didn't include him because I made the decision that I don't want this Nazi in my game. So it's I just erased him. But people complained about that, said, no, he was there, so please include it. No, I said, no, I don't want him to be there.
Yeah, absolutely. We have the choice to do these things. We can just say, no, it's our product, it's our thing. It's like we can make a choice, right?
I mean, in the end, it is a product of fiction, right? I mean, I guess it kind of depends, but I don't think anybody of us would say, hey, we did our research to that degree that we're absolutely certain that this is, a documentary style depiction of an accurate time and place. Because of the stuff that we're changing to make it more fun, but also because of the amount of research we're spending on something like these projects. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that ultimately we are we're a depiction at a certain level. I think there are you have to have a history book to actually get all of the detail in. We're not books. We're another medium. So in a similar way, where somebody who's making a TV series or a movie has to make some choices about how far they go with their depiction of history, of events. So I would agree with you. It's like, well, how far should I go? Because also at some point it's not entertaining. It's not what people expected. It's not what they bought it for. Is to be taught history in detail. If they wanted that, then there are other methods of doing that. So we can provide some level of education and interest. And one of the things that I actually imagine, obviously I haven't met those people, that somewhere out there's somebody who's played my games and your games who goes, that's really interesting, I'm going to go and learn a bit more about that, and then go to a castle or a museum or something like that, and then go, this is really, God, no, I didn't know about that, and then learn a bit more.
I mean, even you just saying that stuff about the factions of the resistances, like I knew, anecdotally a little bit about that, but now I'm interested to go and read more and watch more and find out more, because it is a great point that, when you have heroism and Hollywood depicting this era, especially with World War II, that we have a tendency to kind of romanticize quite a lot. It kind of gets rid of all the gray. It's just, these were the good guys. They were all united. and they were uniting against the bad guys, and they were all bad, and that's the end of the conversation, basically.
To give them their due to some extent, the fact that they've made an even more superficial, but they are covering the subject matter, meant that potentially we then went out and found out more. So even if something is covering a bit of history and even the slightest sort of level, it's going to keep people who are curious finding out a bit more. And I think that's a good thing, because what we don't want is sort of history to be just forgotten about, because there's an enormous amount to learn from history, funnily enough. There's a lot of people repeating it.
I did have a slightly sort of as a slight segue from this. Didi, I've got a question here for you.
Yeah.
Obviously, the Roman Empire. The question I've got down is, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? But the serious question is, obviously, like, the Roman Empire is a really well documented. A lot of people, at least in the UK, we learn about it during school time. It's very iconic. I personally, with my partner, watch Gladiator at least once a year. So was this era for you a blessing or a curse, or a mix of the two when creating a strategy game that's trying to do factor in historical accuracy as much as possible?
I think for me it was more a blessing, because there was, as I already said, there was some stuff that I could get inspiration from. As you say, Gladiator and all the movies and documentaries, and you have everything there. The templates. I know how the visuals of a soldier have to look like. So because I'm not a creative person, so it helps me a lot if I have those references. And I guess the best thing is that if you do something in such an iconic era, you already have the audience for the game. So, like me, I have no marketing budget, but when I make a game in this era, I already have people that are interested in this. So, I guess it helped me a lot, of course.
James, Jeremy, do you feel like your settings have been blessings or curses in ways that we haven't already covered?
I think it's been a huge blessing. It comes back a bit to that photographic evidence thing I was talking about. But as a personal anecdote, I had a total wrong conception of what an airfield was when we started this game. I thought like this would be like very tightly planned, solid, ordered infrastructures, all this kind of jazz. And while some airfields certainly were, looking through all of these archives from the era for something, much of it just showed that, especially in early stages, any field with some tents just had to do and be an airfield. And that was, I think that's the other thing where I feel like this type of research is also like really inspiring, because first of all, we kind of realized, oh wow, this is actually a great setting for a base builder, because you can really start with your first tent and then end up with the huge airbase. But it also showed kind of these interesting quirks that kind of manifested itself. So, for example, crew and pilots had like kind of a strict class hierarchy difference. So people who were working on the base were not the same hierarchy as officers and pilots. So, but when you only have like one tent, that's like a dark tent or something, how do you make this visible? So we had like this one photography that really stuck in my mind, where there's like this cobbled together dark tent somewhere on the grass field, but they got some Persian rug out of a village nearby and laid it out, and then there were like 3 chairs that were then specifically designated that only pilots and officers could sit in them, so that they had their own neat little area that made them special on this airbase. So I think it's been a real blessing to be able to see these kind of things, to be able to have these photographic evidences and find those scores and be like, oh yeah, we definitely should, make that pilots feel better if their chair is just in the slightest a bit more exquisite than that of regular ground crew. And maybe to finish off that point, this will actually be a challenge for us once we go into different factions, into different points of the world that are less well documented, because already on the German side in the Luftwaffe, but also, for example, Northern Africa, the Italians, a lot of that evidence, a lot of these photographies are just not that well preserved, got lost in the war, got destroyed in the war. The nation's not being that proud of it that they built entire museums about it. So a lot of it is just hidden in archives, and we'll need to figure out how we'll be able to deal with that.
On blessing, I don't think the word is curse. On blessing and curse, I think there's an interesting thing there for sort of budding games makers or other people out there considering making games set in history or in the present time, right? Is that it gives you enormous wealth of material, right? So like you said, Didi, in terms of like if you're not got the creative team to create a whole new fantasy or science fiction world with all of the characters, creatures, etc. in it. In terms of game making, creating a historical game gives you a great starting point, whether you stick to slavishly to the true history, or it's sort of like bending the history or taking it in strange new directions. I think it is a blessing in that way to create historical games, and as you said, also a blessing to be able to tell people these stories and hopefully educate people in some fashion or pique their interest. So I think there is definitely a blessing. Like I said, I wouldn't say curse, but like clearly there are people who are just not that interested in historical games, or just not interested in the historical period that you've chosen, right? So even within our discussions, there are people who are like, oh, I like historical games, but I'm just not that keen on this particular period of history for whatever reason, right? So I think that there's blessings and curses in that regard, and certainly, historical does mean that you've got, in most periods of history, lots of potential material to create something that without having like I said, that entirely huge creative team. And if you can find the right part of history, maybe you can unearth something that people haven't covered that much, that is really hits the mark in terms of, when you go out there and market your game, it's like people go, oh, I've really been waiting for a game about that bit of history on that bit of the planet, and like, cool, right? Wouldn't that be good to find that golden thing that people are very, very excited about?
Yeah, I guess like this is not a question that's on the list, so I'm going a bit off piece now, but I think it's a good one for everyone here. How do you go about deciding what period? I mean, obviously we all have our own sort of subgenres within the strategy space, but how do you, just as a broad question, how do you decide where to set your games? To anyone, James, go first.
Sure. I mean, for me, for this, it was I'd sold my last company. I was thinking about what to do for the next company. There were various ideas. I can't remember. It's almost like one of those things where a subatomic particle went through the middle of my brain and went, huh. Like, I wonder if, and it's to some extent it comes down to like, what do I like? I might be totally wrong, but what do I like? So like, I had multiple ideas, right? It wasn't the only idea, and then sort of went round and said to people, do you think this exists? This should exist as a thing? And also did a bunch of research, sat out there, looked on the internet. Does something like this exist, and so forth? Because there's a whole bunch of very boring reasons. As you can't just, well, you can, but like if you just made exactly what you wanted to make just because you thought of it, you might find that actually there's a million other ones like that, which is a thing. But so picking a point in history was a slightly initially selfish move of like, I really fancy playing that game. For me, for this one, I mean, would that be the case for a future game set in history? Probably not. It would be more, what have we learned, and what do we think players want? But certainly for this one, for this particular case, it was like, what would I like to play? So I actually managed to, it was just a point in time because I had, a moment where I could start a new company and had some initial cash. I was able to selfishly choose. It's the thing that people dream about. Is like, I can finally make the thing that I want to make. Doesn't happen every day, doesn't happen all the time, but this particular case, it did.
Yeah, exactly. The same here. I pick and do those games that I want not only to make but to play. That's what keeping me doing this, because I want this final product. I want to play it by myself. So for Roman Victor, I played around with mechanics, and I found this formation mechanic, and it worked so well that I thought, I actually then I saw this, and I had the picture of Roman formations in my head, and yeah, so I thought I need to pick this topic because it was just in my head. I saw the formation, and then Roman armies, and the rest is history.
And you just finished watching Gladiator, and that tear was rolling down your cheek as the final sequence happens.
Yeah.
Similarly, but it's kind of hard to pin down, to be honest, because in one hand it was, my co-founders' passions of base builders, history, politics that very much influenced this into our internal pipeline, where we have like a lot of projects that go through, a prototype stage and then a demo stage where we're trying to figure out whether this plays well. But then on the other hand, it was also that we kind of looked at what's out there, and we were like, hey, nobody has ever done a World War II base builder, really, and especially not one that's in a non-battle area, so where you basically can take care of your people off the base and everything, and you need to do everything before you send them out to missions. So we very much also looked at it from a market perspective, where like, hey, this could be something that people want. This is something that is, a very specific niche, but it could be a niche because it zooms out so much into, very cozy places, let's say, of World War II, and instead of showing the bigger pictures and the battles and the land gains and all the things that the Hearts of Iron or something would do. And yeah, I mean, for us, it kind of for us, it was really important that even though we are passionate about a project like this, that we still want to find out, are we the only ones that care about something like this? And that's why we did the Kickstarter. And I mean, in our case, we're now blessed enough that we raised over 100,000 euros with it. So we knew, we should really continue with this. We feel like there is somebody who, like us, wants accurate planes, but taking care of a base together. And that was really reassuring. But we were very much ready to say, hey, if we don't find 500 people who care enough about this, then it's just us, and we should drop this, and we should not do this game.
Yeah, it's really we're all feeling quite sort of sheepish about saying, like, we set a game here because we wanted to make this game and it was interesting to us, but without that, you've got to have the Venn diagram, right, of like, you want to make something, players want it, and you or your team can technically accomplish that. And I think without the interest coming from us, the games themselves would just be quite, soulless experiences, right? So it's about finding that kind of sweet spot between the two. And the research is definitely the boring side, but it's kind of, it's definitely illuminating. We try to, we talk to our community constantly about what they're interested in, be it setting, game features, etc. But it definitely has to be a balance between what they want and what we are passionate about, because games take ages to make, and they're really stressful, and they're really hard work, and the industry can be quite brutal at times. So it has to be something that the team's passionate about.
I agree. It's interesting. You need that initial spark and the passion and the desire to get something going, right? By a core of the team, like you need that to get it going. But also, yes, there are Venn diagrams. I do think about Venn diagrams. I do worry about Venn diagrams quite a bit. It's amazingly how many appear on the? Oh, you can't see it, but anyway, there's a whiteboard behind me. How many appear on the whiteboard of Venn diagrams over time? Going, is there?
I'm glad I'm not the only one.
Is there like this genre with this setting? Is there a lot of people in that space, or is it like no people in that space? Yeah, I think so. I mean, especially as games making has gone along, obviously more and more things have been covered. So you're trying to find that new space that hasn't been covered, and also why hasn't it been covered? Is it not been covered because nobody wants it, or is it is it because it just hasn't? And there's an open goal. There's something you can do there. So yeah, again, I'm glad that I'm not the only one who worries about such things. But like, I think it's very interesting going forwards, because the nature of our company's changed and so on, because we've now got a game out there and we're thinking about the future, is sort of like a more analytical, there's a bigger team, there's more at stake. It's got to be more analytical as to what we might look at in the future for, historical settings, and spend more time worrying about Venn diagrams and not have just the luxury of going, oh, I'd like to play that. That's the problem. That's the problem when you get a bit bigger.
Yes.
Is like then you have you can't just do what you want to do and hope that what you want is what everybody else wants. But I'd love to cover more periods of history in games. All of the ones that you've mentioned, in fact, of course, are all great periods, of time that people really enjoy in games. I do wonder if there's one that we're all just missing. I don't know. That's not me going, I've got a great idea, but we're all just missing, and then somebody's going to cover a period of history that we all go, of course.
That was going to be my next question, actually. So without giving away our secret Venn diagrams or future plans or whatever, what is there a setting that like your gut, like forget about the market, forget about all the trends and whatever, like is there a setting that your gut wants to do at some point?
That's a tricky one, isn't it? We're all going, I don't know. There's a lot. The thing is, for me, I'd say there's a whole bunch, right? There's not one that stands out of like, yeah, absolutely. I mean, in Stronghold, I mean, I think medieval just still always I find very attractive, and there's something about it. Maybe it's just the way we're taught at school in Europe, and the thing is, you worry about that and go, well, actually, does it appeal globally? I don't know, but like, I'd still like to do medieval. And funnily enough, I just visited a castle a couple of weekends ago, so that's in my mind. So I don't want to do medieval.
One?
It was Arundel Castle.
Oh, lovely! Yeah, nice.
Yeah, Arundel Castle's nice.
That's
so
a great
yeah,
one.
yeah. And in Guildford here, we've got a castle, but it's the tiniest, weeniest stub of a thing that's not really a castle at all. Yeah,
I think that's the issue we have as well. Sorry, go on.
No, but yeah, medieval I would like to do at some point, in some way.
I definitely think that medieval is like as you were saying, it's kind of something that a lot of people like. You either learn about it in school or through popular culture, or when you're a kid, you're told about knights and archers and King Arthur and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of ingrained in people's minds. And we talk to content creators, and they'll just be like, we're like, what setting do you want? And they're like, just green medieval Europe, that's all we want. So it's definitely kind of for lack of a better phrase, evergreen. But I definitely agree with you on the point that like there's just so many. Like we spend a lot of time talking to our community, and they have so many very specific ideas. One of which was like a Stronghold game like set in India, with like the forts and the history and the animals and the weapons and the possibilities for like siege stuff as well. And that's really that's so exciting. I'm lucky enough to have been to India once for a couple of weeks, and going to the Red Fort and just traveling around and stuff like that. And it's just that's such a rich, fascinating place. But then the marketing half of my brain goes, but is that just it? It's working out whether that one comment on YouTube represents 100,000 people or whether it represents 1,000 people. And that's the kind of point where we have to like reel ourselves in and go, yes, there are amazing, possibilities on that front, but we have 45 people to house and keep the lights on at the studio and stuff like that. So I feel your pain of being at a certain size and then having to be like, no, wait, can't do that cool thing because we have to do something that the market wants. But then again, if everyone did that, then there would be no breakout successes. So it's there's always a risk element. Are there any other secret settings that people would love to do?
What you could do, if you can't take just this setting, that you allow mods. That's what I did, or at least I tried. So people did some special time periods in their mods. It's just just minor mods, but of course then you can at least give them a bit of tools so that they can do it by themselves. If you can't do it in your studio, but
Yeah.
I know what you mean by with the Indian setting for the market. It won't work, I guess.
Yeah, I mean,
or maybe we're secretly doing that, and I'm just trying to put everyone else off.
I mean, and on a personal level, I would probably go forward in time. I feel like there's just so much, human aspect, political intrigue, and everything in the Cold War that hasn't been in, game genres across the board yet, where I feel like there's a huge potential. But again, yeah, there's the Venn diagram. How many people do really care about the Cold War and want to play that? Like, if it's not like some really fancy spy setting, how can you get people into that? Is going to be like a huge challenge. But I think Didi kind of raises like a very great point that goes a bit into our direction. But I guess one of the strengths that we have, if we like choose, some very specific setting, and with today's possibility of gathering information about it, and some people just being like huge buffs or nerds, involving your community and allowing mods and allowing them to contribute and allowing them to do missions or events that could happen or anything like that in your game, I feel like is one of the biggest strengths in our genres that we're doing, and one of the biggest strengths if you're going into a historic setting, right? Because you can really flesh it out by crowdsourcing way more than you could with any setting that is fictionless or sci-fi or anything like that. So that is a huge potential, in my opinion, why working together with your fan base, your Discord, your community is so rewarding, I think.
It's amazing. Yeah. One guy did a Star Wars mod for Roman Victor. I'm not sure how I managed to do it, but it looks amazing.
Okay, that's not exactly what I had in mind, but that's amazing.
Yeah. No.
Oh well, with your game, Jeremy, I was thinking one of the things you could go in at some point is obviously you could go off into space in the future, like managing a fighter base for space fighters. Very similar, but there you go. But
I need to see if you can get the Battlestar Galactica license or something like that.
Exactly, we're all just secretly wanting a license, at some point.
Yeah, it's definitely, once you've covered all the other factions, I'd be very interested in obviously Pacific for yourselves at some point, because I think there's obviously it's has more of appeal to the US market. The US market, obviously, the biggest or second biggest market on in games. So covering off the Pacific, there was I think it was after the Wing Commander series, there was Pacific Strike. I think he did a sort of short a game which was I really enjoyed that, and it actually helped me think about a period of World War II history that I hadn't certainly been exposed to so much back in my early 20s, which was looking at the all the aircraft carrier action and the aircraft on that side of the of the planet during World War II. So
I mean, that's what we're hoping for, right? I mean, we're
Yeah.
of course hoping that we will have enough traction and enough people that the game gets big enough that then we can do like lots of new settings. So there's two that are kind of very dear to my heart. One is Pacific, Guadalcanal, rolling up fast bases on tiny islands, trying to make that work. And the other one that I would really love to do is the Night Witches in Russia. So basically, this squadron of all-female bomber pilots who were only allowed to have World War I planes. And so they adopted this technique of flying with their engines off, gliding down during the night and howling it up last second while dropping bombs, which got them the name the Night Witches.
Oh, that's
Which
terrifying.
I think this is so
Amazing.
insanely cool, and like being able to be commander of a base of the Night Witches is something that is kind of top tier end goal for ground bases for me.
Yeah, there you go. There's a thing I've learned. I've learned a thing. I did not know that. That sounds really. I'm going to write it down right now. Go look up later.
There's even a tabletop RPG book about the Night Witches, which blew my mind when I found it.
Yeah, I think in terms of you were talking about Battlestar Galactica earlier. It's definitely an interesting angle. Has anyone here been tempted to go sort of outside of historical, to introduce fantasy elements, to think about a licensed IP that they like to work with, and have you ever had thoughts about that, and what would attract you to that? Whereas you're keeping all your sort of simulation strategy style gameplay, but putting it in a slightly different format. Would that be attractive to people, or do we all just want to stay sort of pretty rooted in history?
Being a bit old, I've worked on lots and lots of games over the years, including licensed games. I think every game, as somebody who likes making games, as I'm guessing we all do, it all appeals. It's all appealing. So, like, sure, yes, licenses are great. Working in licenses is great. Working in historical is great. Working in something you've completely made up from scratch is great. It's all good. But it's different. It's just different. Right? It has different challenges and different appeals, right? So the answer is yes. I'm sure I'll work in licensed IP again, but also I love working in historical settings and the challenges and interest that brings, and also like dreaming up horror or fantasy or science fiction as well. It's all good.
How would you say the pressures of working in a license audience compared to the pressures of a historical setting where people are very sort of dedicated to that particular period? Are there commonalities there, or?
I think we're going off topic, but I'll give you a short summary. So many years ago, I've worked on a few IPs, but one of the bigger ones was worked on a Warhammer 40,000 Fire Warrior back in the early 2000s, which was an FPS. And the pressures of that is the relief of pressure is you've got a whole world. There it is. It's all done. Pressures of that, though, is what story do you tell in that world? Depicting it correctly for the person who is the license holder, because they go, nope, doesn't look like that, or it doesn't sound like that, or whatever. There's all those kinds of things. And then the fan base, and the fan base is they go, no. Like some of them are like, yep, that's great, that's exactly what I wanted. But just like when we watched the latest Marvel, DC, whatever movie, we all sit there and go, no, that's not what I wanted, right? So swings and roundabouts.
Well, I mean, we've mentioned Warhammer 40,000, so that's my mission accomplished for this talk.
What you were trying to do.
Well, if you can't see because I've got my background on, but there's a lot of it in the background. I've been told we've got about 10 minutes left to discuss. So is there anything else that just sort of like broad strokes points that have come as a result of this discussion that people want to talk about for a few minutes?
I have one thing that was on my mind earlier, and I'll just bring it up again. Hopefully for, there's some game makers out there sort of listening to this, is that, and I'm sure it's sort of similar to a point we raised earlier to some extent, is that you're going to have to bend. You're going to have to at some points bend history to be able to make the game that you want in your mind. Unfortunately, in World War II, there wasn't much magic, but in order to do certain things that gamers expect to be able to do, or solve some gameplay problems, you're going to have to introduce magic, right? You're going to need, say, for example, in our game, right? There's a guy over there, but we need a distance healing. How do you heal at a distance, right? You can't. But the gameplay really needs it. Really needs it, like to be able to solve a problem that makes the gamer have the fun that they want to have, right? And it's like, God, those conversations are hard because you're going, oh, that's magic, right? It doesn't exist. It's science fiction or it's magic. You just can't heal somebody who's been shot from a distance. But at some points you have to make those hard compromises, and and so on. So, all of us in all of our games, I'm sure we're going, well, yeah, but it will be fun and people will forgive you and go, no, I can see why. And I think that's one of the things that I'd say to people not to worry too much about. It was sort of mentioned a bit earlier with sort of bending history a little bit, but also bending mechanics a bit in your game making, is that ultimately, again, we're making something that it's got to play well, right? You want it to play well, so you have to put a bit of something in there, even though it didn't exist, unless you are making an out and out simulation, right? Which is different.
I think Nick kind of gave a great example beforehand, right? I mean, you can also just dig into stories, into history, into what happened, and be inspired, find that flaming ox to get that gameplay mechanic that you need for something like that. Because then I think your fan base and your players will really appreciate that, because you've been thorough or you're referencing something that is fun. We have a pet lion planned for our base, because there was once a pilot, I forgot his name, but he had
Brilliant.
a pet lion. And so that is now our out to be able to have different types of pets, and one of them can be a lion. So I feel like that is probably the way to go about it, to have that magic, as you say, that gameplay mechanic that you kind of want to have. I think there's lots of things to uncover once you dig enough, that can then just be like really fun and interesting, and people will maybe have a laugh about. But I think it's okay to also have a laugh at some very serious settings or very historical setting.
That's a good point, actually, is that one of the things that we have of our people chatting back at base is that they are actually humans, right? Ultimately, from a very high point of view, there's warring factions and so forth. From the mid-level, yep, still warring, but I can sort of see the people. When you get in close, they're people, and they can't just sit and be miserable and talk about war all day. They're humans and they do human things. And actually, in our games, that the American and the Brit argue about tea. It's like, it's one of those things, and people make little jibes and funny comments at it, or just talk about what they're going to do when it's all done. It's like, what are you going to do when we finish this? Oh, I'm going to open a shop probably. And it's like they're humans. Like, if we can get humanity into what we do, I think that's really good as well.
Was that a challenge for you, Didi, to actually find, anecdotes about Roman soldiers or something like that are kind of, fun to bring up? Because I feel like, we might have a way easier time here.
I didn't go into that much detail, but actually I put Asterix and Obelix in there as an Easter egg.
Nice. I think that's great.
Because,
they're not really Asterix and Obelix.
they can die. So
That's great.
But actually, if they punch their enemies, if they punch the Roman legions, they fly away. So I just had to include it. Had no chance.
That's great. Yeah, I think you reminded me about Asterix and Obelix now, and I love that. But again, it's it's an example of like, that is a touch point in most people's early life for this stuff, and that's their that's their entry point. So like James was saying earlier, like, one-sided or imperfect or Hollywood-fied versions of history are still really, really valuable and close to our hearts, and it's a wonderful thing. I think for us it just comes down to people want to feel like they mined the stone, which was delivered to the resource pile, which then was used to make the wall. They don't need to see every single brick or every single piece of stone being laid, right? They just need to know that that process is happening. And for most people, that's kind of the sweet spot for them.
Yeah, I mean, the good thing is, like, you know, for a lot of people, not for everybody, for a lot of people, history is fascinating. And whatever way you can involve people in that through whatever medium, right? And we're just another medium. What that we can fascinate. And I think that's the good thing is, like, when I'm playing Civilization or when I'm playing Stronghold or when I'm playing anything, I can at least for a moment go, well, that's interesting. You know, I never thought about that. So it's more, that's the thing, is like it's the opposite. If you've got a sci-fi or a fantasy world, people know it's not real, and they can't deliver what we can deliver, as in people going, so we did that as a species, we did this thing with this stuff and this happened, right? For good or bad, right? And they can go, well, that's really interesting. And I think that's something that we're able to do, right, through what we do, which is great.
And on that positive note, I think it is about time that we wrap up the panel. I will take this opportunity to plug all of our games. So please go wishlist and or buy Classified France 44, Roma Invicta, any Stronghold game, take your pick, maybe Definitive Edition, and of course Ground of Aces. I just want to say as well, it's been a pleasure meeting you all, and yep, thank you to all of our panelists today. I think that's the right term, panelists. So Didi, James, Jeremy, thank you so much. It's been awesome to meet you all.
Thank you.
And yeah, please go check out TactiCon 2024. There's loads of great demos. It's a wonderful event, loads of great discounts. Please do check it out, and hopefully we'll be back again.
Thank you, Nick.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.